Hi everyone. Lydia is currently Artefact Conservator at National Museum Scotland and the Events Coordinator at Icon Ethnography Group. Her fields of interest are objects made of organic and mixed materials from different cultural backgrounds and handcraft techniques. She was trained at the University of Applied Sciences in Erfurt, Germany, where she specialised in the conservation of organic materials. She graduated in 2012 after completing internships in the Conservation Department of National Museum Scotland, the Heritage Museum in Hong Kong, and the Rice-Engelhorn Museum in Mannheim, Germany. Her previous work includes freelance work as project conservator for the Hunterian Museum to support the collection's MOVE programme, where she assessed the Hunterian scientific instruments collection and coordinated the packing and transfer of this collection to a new storage facility. In 2017 and 18, she was invited to give workshops and lectures on the conservation of featherwork, skeletal material and plant material at Gothenburg University. So I will now hand over to Lydia. Thanks.
Hi, thank you very much, Kay. I also would like to welcome you to the talk, and I hope you enjoy the next 30-40 minutes. And please feel free to ask me anything you want to know afterwards. So I'm sharing my screen. Before I want to start with actually talking about the conservation of the drinking horn, I would like to give you some more background information first about the project which led to its treatment. The object was selected for the Legacies of Empire exhibition, which is currently on display at the National War Museum in Edinburgh Castle. This exhibition is one of the products of an ongoing research project with the name Baggage and Belonging. This project aligns with the National Museum's national strategy to better understand the imperial and colonial histories and legacies associated with our collections, their importance for contemporary communities, and to share this information with our audiences. The research project examines the motivations for military collecting, and it investigates cultures of collecting within the British Armed Forces while on campaign in Africa and India, tracing collections and their histories through archival and material evidence. This exhibition, Legacies of Empire itself, investigates why these objects were collected by members of the British military and how they came to be in museums. I'm actually sharing that as well. The exhibition looks at the different terminologies to understand and differentiate between loot, prize and retribution, trophies, gifts and trades, relics and memorials, and the soldier as collector. The James Bruce drinking horn was selected as an example for the trophies taken during colonial wars. The horn is named after James Bruce of Kinnaird, who was a Scottish traveller and travel writer who successfully traced the source of the Blue Nile. During his travels in North Africa and Ethiopia, Bruce had also commanded Ethiopian troops in internal conflicts. In the Battle of Sabakusa in May 1772, Bruce took the 92-centimeter long horn from the camp of Aitotesphos, the governor of Semen. James Bruce describes how he got to the horn in the 4th volume of his book, Travels to Discover the Source of the Nile, and I would like to recite this paragraph as it provides an insight to how this object was taken. I passed a large tent, which I judged to be that of Aitotesphos, which our people immediately cut open. Upon a large tin platter on a bench lay one of the large horns, perfectly drained of the spirits that it had contained. It was one of the most beautiful for shape and color I ever had seen, though not one of the largest. This horn was all my booty that night. This travel report is very interesting as it states that the horn was intact when he took it, and actually the opposite of what you can see here in the image. James Bruce also mentions in his book that he presented the horn back in Britain to his future father-in-law, Sir Thomas Dundas, to serve as bugle horn to the Fauconberg Regiment. For this purpose, it was adapted at both ends with metal fittings and a silver-plated plaque, which describes how James Bruce took the horn during the Battle of Sabacusa. The Fauconberg Regiment had been disbanded soon after, and even James Bruce didn't know what happened to the horn after that, though he states in his book, it is probably placed in some public collection, or at least ought to be. After 250 years, his words came true. So in 2018, the National Museum of Scotland acquired the horn. It complements a group of objects James Bruce brought back to Britain, such as the coconut cup he brought back from the Nile expedition, which has another fascinating story to tell. But back to the drinking horn. When it arrived in the lab, it was far away from its original condition, and I would guess that James Bruce himself might have not recognized it. Over 250 years later, it was broken in two pieces, which had been formerly mended with multiple layers of bandages. Over time, the fabric of the bandages deteriorated, which led to splits and a renewed separation of both pieces. Additionally, the original golden color of the horn was disguised by a dark brown coating. Selected for the Legacies of Empire exhibition, the conservation goal was to stabilize the horn and to mend both pieces back together. When I undertook an initial examination of the object, I realized that a reliable assessment of its condition and the stabilization treatment will be impeded by the bandages. Further on, the damage I could identify made clear that further damage to the horn material will occur when no stabilization treatment can be carried out. This fact caused a conflict between the preservation of the object itself and the preservation of the damage and old repairs, as they are part of the object's history. To make a decision, the curator and I had to evaluate the historic value of damage and repair to decide if we should keep the bandages in place or if we can remove them, or if we can find a way to preserve both horn and repairs. In terms of evaluating the historic value of the damage and repair, we were lucky to know from Bruce's travel report that the horn was intact when he took it and when it was adjusted to serve as a bugle horn. Therefore, the damage and repairs are not connected to the events in the earlier history of the horn. In the end, we could not find out when exactly the horn broke into two pieces, but I could identify on behalf of newspaper fragments, which were trapped in between horn and the bandages, that it had been mended in 1928. Due to this information, we assume that the damage occurred early 1900 and that the hemp rope used for hanging the horn onto a wall simply failed, so that the horn fell onto a hard surface where it broke into two pieces. With this insight about the history of the object on one hand, and the urgent need for stabilization treatment on the other, we made a decision to remove the bandages. As the bandages and repair still have a historic value, I assured the curator to document the bandages and their positioning before and during the removal in detail. I chose to document the unraveling process by means of a time-lapse video, as this allows to retrace where each layer of fabric was located and have been applied. At the same time, this form of documentation helped me to keep my hands free to carry out the task. I find that this documentation method offers a good solution to preserve historic information when this information is threatened to be lost for the benefit of the preservation of the object. During the unraveling process, I gained new information about the repair itself. 3 different types of fabric had been used and adhered with protein glue. I also became aware that the dark brown coating on the surface must have been applied after the bandaging, as it was not found underneath, but instead stained the top layers of these bandages. With the removal of the bandages, the beautiful original honey-like color of the horn came to light, as well as the full scope of damages to the horn. The condition was worse than I expected. Till to that point, I was hoping and expecting that fragments of horn material were only dislocated, but it turned out that large pieces of the horn were actually missing. The bandages were also hiding large longitudinal cracks, which are extending from the break edges. I counted 14 cracks in total, and the longest crack measured 22 centimeters in length. The cracks promoted further damage, such as the deformation of broken sections. I assume that the horn had been stored with a significant weight on the broken areas for some time, and this caused the material to collapse inwards and to overlap along the break edges. The horn material was delaminating into countless paper-thin layers along the break edges and showed some lifting of material on the internal surface as well. Moreover, the inner surface of the horn was heavily soiled, with encrusted layers of dirt, which served as breeding ground for pests. And here you can see between some paper fragments and dirt, there's like a little lava skin still attached to it. Something really had lived in there. With the removal of the bandages, I also uncovered another repair we weren't actually aware of. A large fill comprised of dark resin and a top layer of wax is given next to the plaque. The filling material was starting to deteriorate, with layers of wax delaminating from the horn surface and exposing the dark brown resin. The resin itself was cracked and started to separate from the horn material as well. Last but not least, I would like to mention the darkened varnish, which is obscuring the original appearance of the horn and also shows signs of loss due to wear and of course due to its partial application. All these revelations made me aware that more treatment time will be required to clean, stabilize, and to mend the object than initially calculated. So this put quite some time pressure on me, as the opening of the exhibition was only 3 months away. To not get overwhelmed by the work ahead, I broke the treatment into manageable steps and set myself time limits for each task. At the beginning, an intensive cleaning of the horn was required to be able to move on to step 2, the reshaping and stabilization process. Step 3 would deal with the challenge to mend both pieces back together, and step 4 to stabilize the object further and make the repairs less obtrusive. by inserting fills in the large areas of loss. I started with the easiest task, the removal of the darkened varnish. I was hoping to remove the varnish with a gentle solvent mixture, as I wanted to avoid that the material will dry out, though only acetone achieved a successful removal of the varnish. Luckily, I found the underlying surface stable and no structural or visual change occurred. The next task was to remove the thick layer of soiling inside the horn. I started with the usual approach by using cotton swabs, but noticed very quickly that these won't bring me far, as the surfaces were extremely dirty. I exchanged the swabs for a toothbrush, which worked much better, but still took a very long time and did not have the impact on the encrusted dirt as I hoped. While testing these cleaning methods, I noticed that the horn material is actually much more stable than initially thought, even where cracks in the lamination occurred. Additionally, the water helped to relax the laminating layers, which made them more flexible and reduced the risk of breakage. This information and awareness gave me the confidence to take a more drastic approach, even when the step still brought me out of my comfort zone, as it is not the normal way I would normally treat a museum object. I moved the horn to our sink and addressed the encrusted dirt with the biggest brush I could find, while rinsing the interior regularly with deionized water. Black water ran out on the other end, and when the water started to become clear, I used a toothbrush to address the dirt in the more vulnerable areas, such as the crevices and the laminating layers. This procedure cuts the cleaning time from, I would say, possibly 2 months to 4 hours. While the horn was about to dry and the horn material was still flexible, I immediately started the reshaping and stabilisation process. Both processes are intertwined, as they have the necessity in common to soften the horn material prior to any intervention, to make it flexible and responsive. I achieved this through humidification by simply applying a moist fabric onto the horn surface. Depending on the task and thickness of the horn, I humidified areas between 2 hours for the laminating areas, 16 hours for compact and sturdy areas which are heavily deformed. Before I could tackle the distortions and large cracks in the horn, I had to turn the adjacent laminating layers back into a compact sheet of horn material. To consolidate these layers, I decided to use protein glue. This glue is water-based and was well matched to the intertwined reshaping process, which required ongoing humidification. A water-based adhesive can react, adapt to slightly changed shapes, and harden out again in the new position. I chose bone glue as it will be strong enough to recreate a rigid and stable horn sheet and withstand the pressure I will need to apply during the reshaping process. A weaker protein glue would have failed halfway through the procedure, and even with bone glue, it was sometimes a balancing act to keep the bond stable. I applied the adhesive with a brush or a syringe between the laminating layers. The drying process could take up to 12 hours, and during that time, the layers had to be pressed tightly together and into the right position. This required different techniques in different areas, and I had to be inventive to apply the pressure I needed. Along the break edges, I could apply clamps to press the delaminating layers together while the adhesive was drying overnight. On the inside of the horn, I refer to the Japanese shunbari technique. Bamboo skewers are inserted under light tension to push down the consolidated layers. A thick layer of PVC pad served as interlayer between the skewers, but also where I had to use clamps. The pad is slightly flexible and follows the shape of the horn, but is rigid enough to distribute the pressure of a skewer or clamp evenly onto the curved surface. During the reshaping process, I had to expand my repertoire of tools to more rigid and stronger materials. Jubilee clamps supported the realignment of cracks and the round shape of the horn in the area with minimal damage. Lightweight C-clamps with a deep throat were essential to mend long cracks. In some cases, I had to use 4 to 5 of these clamps in a row. Another helpful, or would even say essential tool, are these wooden blocks. I cut concave and convex blocks with the same curve of the horn. These blocks served as molds to push deformed material back into position. These were especially helpful in areas where material had been squished inwards. The blocks lifted the material evenly and helped me to compress delaminating areas at the same time. Further on, the plain sides of the blocks allowed me to apply clamps without them sliding off the curved surface of the horn. I left the clamps in place overnight to ensure the horn material has fully dried and regained its sturdiness. Unfortunately, it is not possible to reduce or remove such severe distortions as given on this object in one go. I had to repeat this process between 5 to 10 times per area, which made this conservation step the most time-consuming. During the conservation or the reshaping process, I encountered problems with the old fill I've mentioned before. These fills prevented a successful reshaping and realignment of deformed areas adjacent to the fill. When I had a closer look, I actually realized why. While the filling material was visually in level with the outer horn surface, it pressed the underlying remaining horn material inwards, causing distortions and tension in that area. I carefully removed the fill and discovered that the fill was covering up a hole in the horn. Further on, the horn material degraded in the contact areas to the filling material, which reconfirmed the necessity to remove the fill. The horn had delaminated into very thin and brittle layers that actually reminded me more of fetal pastry than of horn material, as you can see here in the lower image. Additionally, filling material had settled in between the delaminating layers and had driven them further apart. We tested various after removing all the filling material from and in between the layers, I undertook the consolidation of the delaminating material and reshaped the layers which were pressed inwards in the same method as mentioned before. It took me around 2 months to reshape the horn. However, the result was worth the wait. And it was very satisfying to see how the broken edges along both parts realign and the original diameter of the horn became reinstated. That said, in a few areas it wasn't possible to achieve a full recovery of the original shape. This was the case in the area with the matching break edge. In this image I took before treatment, the matching break edge is highlighted in red, and you can see that it is actually just a very small area. When you look on the left-hand side, you notice that the horn material is deformed and overlaps along the crack. I managed to reshape the material so that it was no longer overlapping, but it was still not enough to reattach the other piece. I had to use a clamp to overcome the remaining tension and keep the material in the desired position. But this could only be a temporary solution. To mend both pieces back together and to support the reshaped areas, I needed an inner cast for the broken horn. I looked into various materials, such as different types of mesh and artificial whalebone, but these were all not rigid enough. Then my colleague Charles made me aware of X-Lite, and this material proved to be exactly what I was searching for. X-Lite is used in the medical sector to cast broken extremities, and it's made of 100% cotton mesh, which is impregnated with a non-toxic thermoplastic resin. I cut the mesh into handy pieces and activated them in a hot water bath before quickly applying each piece to the inner surface of the horn. I started in the area with the least damage and worked my way outward to the break edges. The material is so strong that it even held a section of horn material in place, which was still under tension and would have collapsed again if it would have not been held open by clamps. This was quite a relief, as this area is key to mending both pieces back together. It was very satisfying to see the structural support filling out and starting to bridge areas of loss. The moment both pieces came back together and were successfully bonded with X-Lite was definitely the highlight of this conservation project. Till to that point, I was actually not sure if it will work as I hoped. The last step was to close the window in the X-Lite, which I had to do from inside. The only access was the opening of the horn, which was circa 60 centimeters away. I reached the area with the heat spatula just about, but could not see from this position what I was actually doing. Therefore, I used an endoscope camera to transfer the live image of the section onto a screen. After its stabilization, I was happy to see the horn back in one piece. I was very relieved that the mending process worked out so well. And just now I was able to see how much of the horn material was actually missing. The large missing areas, now bridged with the white X-Lite mesh, contrasted to the light appearance of the horn. My next step was to give this repair a more discreet appearance. Large areas of loss are very close to the plaque, which is an important point of focus in the exhibition. Therefore, the areas of loss for now my repair should be as less obtrusive as possible, so that the visitor will be able to focus on the object and its story, which is highlighted by the plaque. To achieve this, I searched for a filling material which matched the various colors, opacity, and sheen of the horn, whilst also being identifiable and having certain elegance in itself. I tested various materials to achieve the desired fill. My first choice, the acrylic adhesive paraloid B72, didn't work for me, as it was very time consuming to cure sheets without creating air bubbles and to mold the sheets into position. My tests with Biva gel also failed, mainly due to the high shrinkage. Epoxy resins achieved the desired colors and opaqueness, but were too runny to apply on curved surfaces. I considered molding and casting the missing areas, but again, I didn't have enough time to develop a successful system. In the end, I moved away from Paraloid epoxy resin and Biva gel and followed the advice of my colleague to use Biva film. Free of solvents, the dry and transparent Biva film eliminated the risk of shrinkage that comes with the gel. As the material is a thermoplast, I could melt the film on a hot plate and mix in different dry pigments ranging from yellow ochre to raw amber to create colored discs. I then mixed various ratios of these together to create a wide range of hues in brown and ochre. In a small area of loss, I tested the material and found that I can achieve with it the desired opacity and sheen. In preparation of carrying out the fills, I covered the X-Light mesh with tinted Japanese paper, as you can see here. Then I used small cuttings of the colored Biva and melted these in place with a heat spatula. As the material becomes gooey when heated up, I could spread it out and build up several colored layers and also kind of blend them in. It felt a bit like in painting with various hues of toffee. After applying the Biva, I smoothed out the surface, first with the heat spatula, and after that also with cotton swabs and solvents. In this way, it was also possible to achieve the desired sheen. The fills took me 2 weeks, but the result was very satisfying as I was able to reproduce the various colors and surface finish of the horn. The fills blend in with the original surfaces very well and make the huge areas of loss and repairs as discreet as possible. Here's just my before and after picture of the horn. Zooming into the area of the old fill, which was hidden underneath the bandages, I would like to show you how this area transformed during treatment from hidden, deformed, and unstable horn material and fills to a stable area with a discrete fill. And here is the entire horn in its different stages before, during, and after conservation. The treatment of the horn took me in total 260 hours, which is about 8 weeks or 2 months. And that's actually only counting in the actual treatment time, but not the time when I humidified it in between. In November 2020, we installed the horn and all other objects for Legacies of Empire exhibition in the War Museum. And as you can see, the horn is mounted upright so that the plaque can be viewed and easily read. Seeing the horn taking its place on display was quite rewarding, especially since I know where it came from in terms of its previous conditions, but also in terms of its history. In this condition now, it can reflect its moving past. Yeah, and if you like to see it, the exhibition is still running till to the 30th of January 2020. And with that, I would like to finish my presentation. Thank you.
That was really great, Lydia. Thank you for that. So we'll go to some Q&As now. So if I'll let you have a little think about it, and if you'd like to pop them in the Q&A function. Okay, got a couple already. Okay, let's dive in. So there's a question here. Was there any interest in analysing the contents of the horn for any residue?
Yeah, so yeah, the interest was there, but we've actually, besides all the dirt and stuff, we couldn't find much. So I took samples from the surfaces because it also, like, you could see the inner surface was quite black. So well, we couldn't really get results for that, but we read that mostly where like these horns were kind of impregnated or burned out, like to make them watertight, water resistant, so that you actually could fill it with hay or meat in this way. So normally, like, it was filled with meat, and then yeah, so you don't want that that it stays in and not goes through the horn at some point.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, another question. Hi Lydia, fantastic visual documentation and techniques, thank you. May I ask, how did you tint the beaver films?
Yeah, so the films, so I used dry pigment, and so first it sounded a bit weird because first I thought, like, how can I use this beaver film, right? Because it's quite a thin film, and yeah, you have to use quite a lot. So you actually take a massive sheet and just peel it off, and then crumble it to a ball, and you melt it on a hot plate. I used like a watch glass, a big watch glass, and then you start to become, so like the film start to melt together, and you become like you get like a big blob of hot beaver in the end. So and when this blob, so when that's fully melted, you stir in your dry pigments this way, dye it, and then you let it cool down, take off the watch glass, and then yeah, cut this, like I called it in disc, because you have then a nice round disc from your watch glass, and just cut bits off and melt them and apply them to your object.
Yeah, it looked like it worked really, really well, like the amount of translucency and everything.
That was quite meditative too.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, another question. Brilliant treatment and images. I was wondering if you thought of the legacy of the object during the project, and if it influenced your treatment approach and the treatment.
Yeah, so yeah, I thought a lot about it, because if we would have read, oh, it was broken, because when I read the inscription of the plaque, I actually first thought, oh, it was laying somewhere in the mud, because how I, like, when I first had a look at this object, it looked like they just picked it up from actually like the river, because it said like a found next to the river Mariam, but it was more like that the camp was based there. So, but as it looked like, at first thought like, oh, the mud is from there, so oh, I want to preserve that, and I don't want to clean it away. But like his James Bruce travel report really made clear that they actually found it in a tent, like in and they really just emptied it, so it was in one piece, and it was in one piece when it was amended. So yeah, but still the bandages, I felt like it's still part of the story, of course. Still like, as I've learned at university, it's like the third or fourth authenticity, yeah, and it's still part, like even dirt is now part of its history. So but it was, I felt like if I can't move them, I can't do much. So it was really a decision about do I try to get that horn stabilized, or should we just give up and leave it as is? And so the information we gathered, and with the newspaper stuck between, we felt like, okay, that breakage definitely occurred like maybe 150 years later, or even much later. So it had not a direct connection to that past anymore. And we felt it was more like it hung somewhere on the wall, and the damage which occurred doesn't have like a historic value in this way. But of course, we still wanted to keep the information. So yeah, but yeah, it was a balancing act always. How much do you do, and what do you lose with treatment? Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. And with it was part of a wider project, wasn't it? And so I can't remember if you said now that, is there a bit on the website about the bigger project?
Yeah, so there's a big research project going on, which is funded by the HRC. And oh yeah, I can actually share a link after that about this project. It's all about like identifying and also looking into the colonial histories and reassessing objects and their stories.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, we'll make sure it gets sent around and everything. Okay, another question. After you removed it from the hot water bath, how long is the working time of the X-Lite mesh before it becomes too rigid to shape?
That goes actually quite quick. So you have to be really.
Is it too quick?
Oh, well, yeah. So also first had to figure out how can I do that, because it sticks directly. So when you take it out of the water bath, it sticks. I used the Melinex sheet then to transfer it actually. Yeah, so you actually I tried to like shake off some of the water, but you don't have much time, because yeah, as soon as it cools down, it hardens. So you want to apply it while it's still warm. So yeah, and then even then, so sometimes when you can't find the right position immediately, and you have to fiddle around with it, it's like, oh, this doesn't stick really well. I have to redo it, or then also when you miss some, like, because you can't actually see much what you're doing. What I did also is then using a heat spatula as well after I applied all the layers, and I had them 3-4 layers on top of each other. Actually have some here. So it becomes really rigid when it's dry, and it's even more rigid when you have like several layers on top of each other, so you can not bend it anymore. But what you can do when you apply it on top of each other, when you feel like, oh, and that part it didn't stick together, you use a heat spatula and just like heat it up in that small position, and then you melt these bits back together, so it achieves quite a really good bond with itself. So yeah, you can actually reheat it and with the heat spatula and locally, which is a great advantage.
Yeah, that's great. I've never used that. I'll try. Yeah, I'll try and use it in the future. Okay, another one. Hi Lydia, terrific presentation. I'm very impressed with how you incorporated unfamiliar tools, materials and techniques. What support did you have from colleagues and curators in the project?
Yeah, so my colleagues, like, yeah, also as I mentioned, Charles, like super helpful, because sometimes I feel like that's what I need, but I don't know if that material exists. And then Charles always said like, yeah, it exists, try that. So that was super helpful for me, because I've never had to do such a big fill, like where I wanted to really achieve that opacity in sheen, and I thought, oh, how can I? So that it's great, like really to work in a team, and everyone has different experience and different knowledge, and then really exchange that and help each other. So with their experience, it's good to learn from each other and then pass on knowledge. Yeah, but from the curator side, I got a full support, and he also said then just do it, because I think he actually thought, oh no, that's unrepairable after we took the bandages off. So I was like, oh. Yeah. But yeah, and it worked out, because I felt like I can make it happen. I could see, like I could envision that it is possible, and it was possible. So but yeah, I got full support from the curator with my decision making as well. Yeah.
That's good. Did the curator sort of periodically visit the lab during treatment, or was it like a grand reveal at the end? Or
I was, so couldn't visit regularly, but I kept him up to date, some pictures. But at some point I was quite so stressed that I just kept on working, and then later, oh, by the way, look how it looks now. I'm like, ooh. It was also a bit problems of access to the site at the time, I guess. So yeah, and I was treating it like, especially doing the fills, then finishing the fills after like lockdown, because I was nearly done and I wanted to finish the object, and then suddenly we all had to go home early last year. So and then I finished the fills in the lab, and of course it was quite restrictive who has access. But it's great with the technology nowadays, so you can just send everything and pass it on digitally and let people know. Especially the videos are quite helpful to see.
Yeah. You're I'm quite intrigued. What do you know? What the old fill? Do you know what that was, or did it come away quite easily, or did you really have to kind of?
Yeah, it's actually because I was unsure about it. So also what's the age of it, right? So my intention was to leave it and say, like, when it doesn't interfere with the stabilization process, why not leaving it? And I try to consolidate it, and I try to cover it up again, at least to keep that part of the pair and story. But it really made it impossible to mend it on the side. It was just like, doesn't want to go, and every time we tried, it popped open on the other end again, and you're like, oh. So and also as I discovered, so it was not just the wax and the dark resin underneath, but also like a carbonous material, which was put in first. Okay. And that actually caused the whole deterioration. So it really broke down the whole material underneath. And so in the end, when I felt like I'm removing something I actually didn't want to remove, I actually thought it was a good decision, because it would just have made it worse. So it was so brittle underneath. So it was like the area where it really crumbled away underneath. Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, unfortunately, it's really difficult to say how that old fill is connected somehow to its past.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering if its orientation changed when it went on display, I guess. Was it originally kind of laying down on a shelf or something, and then you were putting it upright? Did it have any other internal supports inside? Sort of form or anything, or was it maybe it was stable enough and it didn't need one? Yeah,
so with the X-Lite, it was so stable, so super happy. So that yeah, it didn't need any other inner support than that. So that was working super well. And the mount was purely an external mount. So the mount, I don't have a close up, but like held the rim of the object. So, and then I went up and had another, just another support here to hold it in the right angle. And yeah, it was decided to put it this way round. Like, it's unusual for a drinking horn to display it like this, because I thought like, but the thing is, the plaque had been fitted this way round onto the horn, and it's really the original position. And the thing is, the plaque had been fitted when it was transformed into a bugle horn, and for that it actually hung horizontally. But the focus was really on the plaques and inscriptions also in this exhibition, or the focus is on like these inscriptions. So you want to have these inscriptions readable, so the focus is on the plaques. So that's why the horn is mounted this way around.
Yeah, sounds good. So we have another question come in. Hi Lydia, thank you so much for sharing your treatment. You did mention this, but I wonder if you could just elaborate a bit. Did you apply the glue by syringe warm to the delaminated sections and then leave these to cool before clamping and shaping? And how did you warm and humidify the horn at this stage?
So for the delaminating areas, mentioned it before. So for delaminating areas, the humidification time wasn't that long, just 2 hours. But in the meantime, I always could work in the other areas sometimes, for example. And I humidified it by applying some fabric on both sides, preferably, and then covering it up to maintain the moisture, humidity in there. And when I felt like now I have achieved the right flexibility, or enough flexibility, I applied adhesive either with a brush or a syringe. And for a syringe, because a syringe cools down really quickly, so I can't get it out anymore. So I actually kept them in a warm water bath. So that's the trick. So just put the syringe in a warm water bath, and glue stays nice and liquid. So and then you can apply it nicely in the same way, and then I immediately press it together. So immediately you press the layers together, use some interlayers, and then apply the clamps, and then just don't touch it again, just let it dry.
Just let it just sort of dissipate off.
I hope I covered all the questions.
So I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Lydia. And if anyone thinks of any more questions, they can always send an email to me. So and Lydia can answer your questions. And we'll also send around that webpage of your project, Lydia. Okay, that's it from us. I hope everyone is keeping well, and hopefully we'll see you all in person sometime soon. And so bye-bye. Have a good evening.